Oh, I'm sorry, product placement. I live in Atlanta now. I give 100 shares of XYZ stock to my daughter. Perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. That's how you would very often make an assignment for a lifetime transfer of closely held stock. It's easy, it's convenient, it's the way that you always know, but there's risk involved with that. If it turns out that we get an appraisal that determines that 100 shares of XYZ stock is worth $5 million, well, we're probably okay because we're not going to pay any gift tax. But then if the service audits that return, conducts their own evaluation, and we end up finding that the real value of that asset was $6 million, I have to pay gift tax. Option number one, when you're dealing with a difficult to value asset like stock in a closely held corporation, like a fractional interest in real estate, like artwork or other collectibles where the appraisals can vary a bit from one to the next, that's kind of difficult. That's a risky proposition because you may have to pay some gift tax. So then people might choose option number two. Option number two says I give 100 shares of stock in XYZ to my daughter. However, if it should be determined by final judgment or order of a competent federal court of last resort that any part of this gift is subject to federal gift tax, that portion of the shares hereby transferred, which is decreed by such court to be subject to federal gift tax, shall automatically be deemed not to be included in this conveyance and shall remain my sole property. Already we like this better because it uses long words that no one understands. And by obfuscation, we can claim that it says virtually anything that we want it to say, right? And you know, how the hell much can you charge for a one-sentence conveyance? But that full billable rate, right? I mean, that's been massaged. That little sucker. I mean, that works well. What's it, of course, saying? What's it saying is, here's the 100 shares, but if it turns out, oops, I did it again. I played with your heart, got lost in the game. Oh, baby, baby. You think I love that I'm separate from above, but I'm not that innocent. If it turns out that stock was really worth more than $5.25 million, that excess portion I get back. So that in no event am I making a gift that's more than $5.25 million. What is that? Well, page 2 in the materials tells you, because I cribbed that language from a Fourth Circuit case called Proctor. And in the Proctor case, Commissioner versus Proctor, Fourth Circuit case 1944, that was held to be a savings clause that the Fourth Circuit said it would not enforce, that it was no good. So we call this language that says, here's the gift, but if it turns out that this is more than what I'm intending such that gift tax liability would result, then I take the excess portion that would trigger gift tax, I take that back. That savings clause the Proctor Court refused to enforce. Why? Well, the Fourth Circuit says there's 4 reasons why that savings clause. The savings clause I used at issue in Proctor is block quoted on page N2, and you'll see it's the same language that I'm using here in example number 2 that's on our first page. And I give you a rather lengthy excerpt on pages 2 and 3 from the Fourth Circuit that identifies the 4 reasons why the Fourth Circuit says savings clauses are bad, they are offensive, they don't work. Number 1, they say they're bad because the suit here for the payment of gift tax liability is a suit that is only between the IRS and the donor. Noticeably absent from this lawsuit are the donees. Because they are not parties to a gift tax lawsuit, they are not bound by the result of this gift tax lawsuit. And it could well be that a different court could decide that that clause is enforceable against the beneficiaries, or if we said that this clause was enforceable, the beneficiaries could get a judgment that would say, no, it's not enforceable, because this decree that we're making is not binding on them. We risk that there could be inconsistent results between courts. So we're not going to enforce that clause because the donees could get a judgment from another court that would say they're entitled to the full 100 shares of stock regardless of the value. So that was one reason. The second reason why, according to the Fourth Circuit, that these savings clauses don't work is that effectively it renders all cases moot, because notice that that language says if it should be determined by a final judgment or order of a competent federal court of last resort. That savings clause only kicks in if you get a court judgment. And the court reasons that any court judgment that then tells you that a gift didn't occur instantly makes every gift tax case before that court moot. So you would be asking a court to render a judgment that would make every case before it moot. That's bizarre, that's weird, we're not going to enforce that kind of rule that has that effect. Third reason, according to the Fourth Circuit, that it doesn't work is that it's internally inconsistent. The only way that you can get a final judgment from a court that gift tax is due is if you declare that there's a gift. But then if you then say there's not a gift, then you don't have a judgment or competent order that part of this gift is subject to the gift tax. You'd never get there because you have the enforcement of this clause that would then say, but you'll never have a gift in the first place that's going to be taxable, and so you can't get an order that there is gift tax that is payable. The court just doesn't see, logically, it was sort of like looking at an Escher drawing, where I'm constantly going downstairs, and yet they always seem to kind of go up and down at the same time. It doesn't make sense, it can't work. And so they say we're not going to enforce it for that. But then, the last reason, and the one that the service always clings to, is the fact that the Fourth Circuit says, well, if we enforce this clause, what incentive does the IRS have to police this transaction? Because the IRS would look and say, uh-oh, there's one of these savings clauses in here. If we successfully challenge the valuation, if we successfully claim if we challenge the claim discount on audit, we're not going to collect any additional tax because then they're just going to take the position of, oh well, our gift was smaller than we originally thought. Thanks for telling us, IRS, but we're still not going to collect anything. And according to the Fourth Circuit, it is against public policy to put the service in a position to not challenge a discount simply because then they're not going to be able to collect any revenue. The fact that you are stripping the service of its incentive to challenge is offensive as a matter of public policy, and the Fourth Circuit said in this part of the country that isn't going to work. Okay? So after Proctor comes out in 1944, everybody's like, oh crap, you can't do a savings clause to protect yourself that way. But then people started doing the technique listed in number 3. Right? The language in number 3 reads, I give 100 shares of stock in XYZ Inc. to my daughter and to Georgia State University. My daughter is to receive that number of shares with a value equal to $5,264,000. Georgia State University is to receive any and all remaining shares. You see what's going on there, right? Here's a big block of 100 shares of stock. If it turns out that the value of that stock is more than $5,264,000, why am I choosing $5,264,000? It's $5.25 million plus a $14,000 annual exclusion. So, by the way, daughter, don't ask for anything for Christmas. We're burning it all on this thing, so you better be happy with it. Okay? Anything that's in excess of that amount is going to go to a charitable organization and is going to be eligible for a charitable deduction for gift tax purposes. If it turns out that the 100 shares of stock is worth less than $5.264 million, everything's going to go to the daughter. But if it turns out to be worth $8 million, you're going to have 5.264 going to the daughter, and you're going to have, what, 2.736 going to Georgia State University. Okay? At first, when the service saw that, they looked up there at number 2 and said, this smells an awful lot like a savings clause, because you're trying to do the same thing here in number 3 that you were trying to do in number 2, which the Fourth Circuit said was offensive to public policy. Because you are here in number 3 too, you are stripping us of the incentive to challenge that valuation. Because if we successfully, if your appraisal originally says that 100 shares is worth $6 million, so that the daughter gets the bulk of it and the charity gets very little. If we later prove that in fact the stock is worth $9 million or $10 million, such that Georgia State should get a much bigger share than what the daughter got, that's all well and good as far as Georgia State is concerned, but we, the IRS, collect nothing. So we still have no incentive to challenge this because we have tax-free gift followed by charitable donation. We're not collecting any revenue if we challenge it. That's offensive. That can't be right. Look at the Proctor case. Proctor's authority for saying that when you strip the service of its incentive to challenge, that is void as a matter of public policy. Well, beginning on page 4, we call this particular one that's used in number 3, by the way, we don't call it a savings clause because that got a bad rap in Proctor. So practitioners took to calling it not a savings clause, but they called it a charitable formula clause. So we call that one a charitable formula clause. And we've had now 3 federal circuit courts that have upheld charitable formula clauses as being valid and not inconsistent with Proctor, that they are perfectly fine techniques. These charitable formula clauses are better than the savings clause. Why? Well, for one thing, you're not needing the court decree to come in and make a determination of gifts. So all of the Proctor rationale about internal inconsistencies and rendering cases moot and everything like that, none of that is applicable with a charitable formula clause, because you're not requiring everything to be conditioned upon an order that gift tax would otherwise be due or payable. So it beats it in that regard. But it also beats us in that regard in the sense that one of the things that's offensive about a savings clause is that you're saying, here's 100 shares of stock. Oh, wait a minute, some of it's taxable? Give me some of it back. Courts have been much more accepting of the charitable formula clause because in all events, the donor is saying, here's 100 shares of stock. And there is no mechanism by which any portion of that 100 shares of stock is coming back to the donor. In a savings clause, the donor is getting some of the property back if it turns out to generate a tax. In a charitable formula clause, you are permanently getting rid of 100 shares of stock. You're not getting any of it back at any time. The only thing that could change is how much of that goes to your league beneficiary and how much of it goes to charity. That's what the valuation dispute would show, but none of it would be coming back. So courts have been much more accepting of a charitable formula clause for that reason. And arguably one of the other things that they really like about it is that who else is involved here is a charitable organization, right? And to say, well, if you're willing to say that the excess doesn't come back to you, but that the excess is instead going to go to Georgia State University, well, then suddenly that just seems a lot less offensive. That doesn't really look like you're doing it as a tax dodge. Of course it is. But nonetheless, it just looks better and it looks nicer. And in fact, when the service has in all of these cases come forward and tried to say, but what about the fact that we collect no additional revenue? It was finally the Ninth Circuit in the Petter case, which we'll talk about, which said, hey guys, your job is not to collect revenue. Your job is to enforce the tax laws as they are written. And so what if your job means that you're not going to collect any extra revenue in a particular case? It's still your job to enforce the transaction as it went down. So you should still have an incentive to challenge a case, even if it means you're not going to collect any revenue. This was clearly written by a judge who has no idea what it's like to be a field agent or counsel for the Internal Revenue Service, right? Because their job is about raising revenue. That is what they're sort of told. That's what matters in terms of being a successful IRS practitioner and a less successful one, right? You're not seeing anybody jump in the GS pay scale because they litigated a bunch of zero revenue cases and secured victories for the charities, right? The other thing that then the IRS tried to look to be a little bit less self-serving, and so they've also argued before these courts of, well, it isn't all just about stripping us of our incentive to collect revenue, because yeah, we have to enforce the tax laws. But see, if we don't challenge these, who will? The courts are like, are you kidding me? Have you ever been against a charity in litigation? These are pit bulls who never let go, right? If Georgia State University feels like that appraisal has undervalued those 100 shares, such that instead of only getting 2.3 shares, that they should instead be getting 12 or 13 shares, they're going to latch onto that. They're going to sue 8 ways to Sunday. Are you kidding me? They're going to be enforcing their obligations like you wouldn't believe. So according to the courts, these charitable formula clauses are fine because, in effect, the charities act like a watchdog, right? If there's really abusive valuation, if we know that those 100 shares of stock are really worth $80 million, but we get an appraisal from a complete idiot who values them at $5,264,000, you've got a charity as a watchdog there that has enforceable rights, that it will enforce to say, we should be getting some of that humongous pie that is there. Whereas under a savings clause, you don't really have that external watchdog because you just have the donor saying, give me the property back, but the donor doesn't have the incentive to do that. The donor's trying to shift out as much as possible. So for all of those reasons, that charitable formula clause under number 3 has been upheld by a series of courts. Page N4, you'll see that there was the case out of the Fifth Circuit, that was the McCord case, where $6.9 million goes to the lead beneficiaries and then the balance to 2 different charitable organizations. The service tried to pounce on the fact that what they did is they went and got an appraisal that undervalued the value. These were limited partnership interests that were transferred. They got an appraisal that really undervalued the limited partnership interests, and so using their agreement that the first $6.9 million was supposed to go to the kids and the rest was supposed to go to charity, they were able to say, well, they used that appraisal and they said, well, then that means X% of the limited partnership interest go to the kids and Y%, whatever's left, goes to the charities. When the service determined that that appraisal lowballed the LP interests and said, in fact, they were worth a lot more, the service said, well, because there's this agreement that says the kids have X%, since we know X% is worth more now, there should be gift tax that's due and payable. The Fifth Circuit upheld the position of the taxpayers that what matters is not the later agreement signed between the kids and the charity about what's X% and what's Y%. What matters is the assignment documentation that gave the kids only $6.9 million worth. So the service tried to say that a later agreement between the charity and the beneficiaries that agreed, okay, this is our slice of the pie, this is your slice of the pie. If the pie turns out to be bigger than we thought, that there might be gift tax due. Because the Fifth Circuit said it's never an agreement between beneficiaries that defines who gets what. It's the assignment documentation from the donor that defines who gets what. And that document said $6.9 million to the kids and the rest to charity. So that means we're going to have to alter the percentages. The charity's going to get more, the kids are going to get less, but there's no tax due to the donor. It was easy to dismiss McCord because it was the first case to ever deal with a charitable formula clause, and it was out of the Fifth Circuit. Taxpayers always win in the Fifth Circuit, right? In Texas, you have the right to bear arms and legs, and you have the right to win in the Fifth Circuit, in any case against the Internal Revenue Service, right? Taxpayers always win in the Fifth Circuit. So it's easy to dismiss it on that ground. But then at the bottom of page N4, a much more measured Eighth Circuit steps up in the Estate of Christensen case, and in a slightly different context ends up upholding a charitable formula clause as being effective. And then on page N5, the Ninth Circuit, even the wacko pinkos over there on the left coast, decide that this is perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. Taxpayers lose in the Ninth Circuit more than any other circuit in the United States. And yet the taxpayer got a victory there too, that the charitable formula clause worked and was enforceable. So everybody came out of those cases thinking, hey, while Proctor says that a savings clause is bad and is offensive to public policy, a charitable formula clause works. So anytime I have a difficult to value asset where I'm thinking, uh-oh, I might pay gift tax, or even if I'm more modest, I just want to make annual exclusion gifts, but I'm doing so with a discounted or fractional interest asset where the valuation is difficult, maybe I should always do so in the form of a charitable formula clause, because if I try to get fancy and do a savings clause like number 2, it's not going to work. And number 1 gives me the risk that I could be burning through my annual exclusion and eating up exemption, or burning through my exemption and having to pay gift tax. So everybody was jumping on board and doing charitable formula clauses. But anytime that you're cramming philanthropy down a client's gullet, okay, something's going to come back up, right? It's never entirely pleasing to say, look, you don't really care about charity, Mr. Burns, but you've got to do that here in this case, because otherwise there's a risk that you're going to burn through, you're going to eat into your exclusion, or you're going to have to pay gift tax that you don't want to do. So along came on page N6, the Wandry case from last year. That, at the time seemed kind of innocuous, but if you kind of wondered, you were sitting at your desk on March 26, 2012, and you felt the ground underneath you move at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time, that was the time when this decision got posted on the U.S. Tax Court website, and planning as we knew it for difficult to value assets forever changed. This one was really earth-shaking. What had happened in Wandry, you got a request that's similar to number 4 there, where it just says, I give that number of shares in XYZ Inc. with a value equal to $5,264,000 to my daughter. There's no charity, but what you're doing is you're not saying I'm giving 100 shares and hoping that the value is less than 5.264. You're saying I'm giving my daughter 5.264 worth of XYZ stock. Does that work? Does that going to be respected, or is that creating something that's too similar to the Proctor savings clause? If I can just do number 4, and I don't have to introduce a charity where I otherwise wouldn't want one, I don't have to worry about the beneficiaries then fighting amongst themselves about who gets what share of the pie. All I'm doing is I'm just saying I'm giving $5.264 million worth to this beneficiary, and that's it. That'd be a lot easier. It doesn't really work. Page N6. It has, if you have the printed materials in front of you. I think, was that those that were just delivered back in the corner? Yeah.
Out in the lobby.
Oh, they're out in the lobby. Oh, okay. What's the stack of materials there? Is that for this afternoon?
Prior seminars.
Oh, you can. Okay, come to another seminar in December and you can get the written materials from this guy. That would be nice. Wow, okay. You know, if you all imposed a few more state taxes, something might run a little bit smoother. But all right. So, in laundry, on pages 6 and 7, if you have the printed materials in front of you, the language there is just, I'm giving you the exact language because you can cut and paste and use this because it kind of works. I hereby assign and transfer as gifts, effective as of January 1, 2004, sufficient number of units in the LLC, so that the fair market value of such units for federal gift tax purposes shall be as follows. And you see there are 4 kids, each get $261,000 worth of units. Why 261? Because in 2004 you had a $1 million gift tax exemption and you had an $11,000 annual exclusion. So take the $1 million exemption, divide it among 4 kids, add an $11,000 annual exclusion, that's $261,000 apiece. And then you'll notice that they even give annual exclusion gifts to 5 grandchildren. These are very unfortunate grandchildren because you'll notice that they each go by simply an initial in their life. Grandchild A, grandchild B, grandchild C, and so on. We're redacting it for their privacy purposes because, of course, some troll is going to track these kids down through social media and then offer to buy them a beer and hope Chris Hansen doesn't show up at the door when they go to meet, right? So, all right, whatever. Husband and wife each make these gifts, okay? And then the language continues. Although the number of units gifted is fixed on the date of the gift, that number is based on the fair market value of the gifted units, which cannot be known on the date of the gift, really, but must be determined after such date based on all relevant information as of that date. Furthermore, the value determined is subject to challenge by the Internal Revenue Service. I intend to have a good faith determination of such value made by an independent third-party professional experienced in such matters and appropriately qualified to make such a determination. Nevertheless, if, after the number of gifted units is determined based on such valuation, the IRS challenges such valuation, and a final determination of a different value is made by the IRS or a court of law, the number of gifted units shall be adjusted accordingly, so that the value of the number of units gifted to each person equals the amount set forth above. And then I love this. In the same manner as a federal estate tax formula marital deduction amount would be adjusted for a valuation redetermination by the IRS and or court of law. Right? That's sort of, hey, when we fund marital trusts and we blow the valuation, we just adjust it, right? Why can't I do that for inter vivos gifting to my kids? I can do it with my spouse and it's perfectly fine under Treasury regulations. I should be able to do the same thing here. The service said, well, no, you can't really. 17 months? No, 19 months. 19 months after making the gift, they finally go get the appraisal. Why? Because the 709 is due next month after extension, right? They finally go get the appraisal. The appraisal comes back and says a 1% interest in that LLC is worth $109,000. So going back to the original language of the gift, if each kid is supposed to get $261,000 worth of units, based on the fact that 1% is worth $109,000, they determined that each kid should get a 2.39% interest in the LLC. And because each grandkid was entitled to $11,000, that meant that every grandchild got 0.1010%. It's a binary gift that's being made to the grandkids. There's a great binary joke, by the way, that goes 001, 0011, 11001, 0. So 2.39% to the kids, 0.101% to the grandkids. That's how much transfers to them. The 709 gets filed. What does the 709 do in describing the gift? The 709 describes the gift as each kid got 2.39% and each grandkid got 0.101%. If they had just done the 709 right, this may not have even been a problem, right? The gift should not have been described as 2.39% and 0.101, right? Because that wasn't the gift. The gift should have been described as $261,000 worth of units and $11,000 worth of units. But because it was described that way, when the service and the taxpayer ultimately agree that 1% is really worth $130,000, the service says, well, then if each kid got 2.39%, that means that the gift to each kid was $315,800. Times 4, we have gift tax due. And the gift to each grandchild at 0.101% times 130,000, that's $13,346. That's more than the annual exclusion. That means we get gift tax too. The taxpayers took the position of, oh, no. What happens is we make this adjustment. Look at that language following the dollar amounts. Now that there's been a determination that 1% is really 130,000, it means now the kids are going to get 2%, not 2.39%. And the grandkids now are going to get 0.0846%, not 0.101%. Thank you, IRS, for correcting us. Here we were prepared to give up more than we really had to. Thank you, but we don't owe you any tax. Okay? To which the service said, well, we'll see you in court. Service attacks this on lots of different grounds. The service says, okay, 1, the 709 said that what the kids got was 2.39 and what the grandkids got was 0.101. That's evidence of what they really got, therefore we should enforce that. To which the tax court quite rightly says, are you high? Because since when does the description in a 709 define a gift? Do you want to be bound by what you put in a 709 as defined in a gift? I sure don't. What defines the gift is the gift.